we're moving on into the sessions, and for our first session, titled Recognizing Creative Skills, Entrepreneurship, and Informal Livelihoods, I'd like to invite our valuable speakers to the stage one by one. Eliza Easton, Head of Policy Unit, Policy and Evidence Center from the UK. Eliza will be moderating this session. Now, Leandro Valiati, lecturer, researcher, and program director in Cultural and Creative Industries, Institute of Cultural Practices, the University of Manchester. Welcome.
I'm going there.
Avril, Joffe, Head of Cultural Policy and Management Department, Wits School of Arts, University of Witwatersrand. Welcome. Omar Nagati, architect, urban planner, and co-founder of Cluster. Omar. Jairaj Mashru, innovation executive at Salesforce.com. Daniar Amaniliev, co-founder and CEO, Olola Co-working Spaces, chair of Kyrgyzstan's Creative Industries Association.
Here.
Now, again, as I said, we have this system, slido.com, so please do not forget to enter your questions as we go during the session. Here you go. This is your guide. You can follow the QR, or else you can use the hashtag in the code. So we're going to be using these questions in the moderated Q&A sessions. They're all very welcome. And, well, I'm so curious to hear in this session, which will set the tone for the day, hopefully, with a big applause from the audience. Let's kick off the day.
Good morning. My name's Eliza, and I'm the Deputy Director working on policy at the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, which, as you heard, is a unique UK-based centre working on research on the creative industries. But we're lucky enough to work with the British Council on this amazing international council, uniquely bringing together voices from all over the world to discuss the future of creative industries policy, but also how, as John said, creative industries can help to solve so many of the world's most significant issues. Today, I'm lucky enough to be talking about creativity and the future of the workforce. It's one of the areas that have really been raised in our agenda, and I hope sets an exciting tone for the morning ahead. So this is quite bright orange. I hope it's not glary. I hope you've had your coffee this morning. So there is a huge opportunity for us who work in the creative industries. All over the world, creative jobs are growing. Now, I said I work for a research centre, so get ready for a very researcher slide. But here is some research which we did. It's based on one of the most significant studies on the future of work, which was led by Pearson and Nesta, the Innovation Foundation, which is where the Policy and Evidence Centre came from. And it looked at all the jobs across the economy and which jobs are likely to grow in the future, using a combination of machine learning, expert advice, and existing trends in the workforce. And what we found is that creative jobs are really the jobs of the future. Right across the world, these are the jobs which are most likely to grow in number. But more than that, we started to identify this sort of special source, which is where jobs are most likely to grow. Almost all creative jobs are likely to grow, but those which involve what we called createch skills, a combination of creative and digital skills, were amongst the very most likely to grow right across the economy. 3 key findings. So, number 1, not all digital skills will be equally important in the future. I know that for the UK government and for other governments, this can be a bit of a shock. We talk about digital skills all the time. Digital skills are the focus. But in fact, when you're thinking about the jobs which are most likely to be automated, done by robots, actually those are the jobs which are very, very, very digital already. They're one step away from automation. The jobs which are most likely to grow involve this special mixture, which is both creative and digital together. And so we find not digital, but creativity is consistently the most significant predictor of an occupation's growth prospects. And as I said, it's the skills that lie at the nexus of creativity and digital that are most associated with roles that are likely to grow in the workforce. This is why the global agenda that we set out isn't just important for people who work in the creative industries now, but for all the people who will join the sector in the future. Another slide, which I apologize for, but this shows something different. So when we were thinking about creative and digital skills, we thought, okay, that's the special sauce for jobs of the future, perhaps. What else needs to be in there? Now, any creatives in this room will know that someone can have great digital skills, great creative skills, but unless they have, right here at the bottom, organizational skills and project management, they're unlikely to be able to make those skills really work for them. And so I would throw that in as well. Later, we'll hear more about freelancers and especially the informal economy. These people really need to manage things like organizational skills and project management to make their livelihoods work. So these, in our research, were what we found were, in job adverts, out today, the top 20 Createch skills. When I show this slide, I always say our research should be sponsored by Adobe, because Adobe is the software company which is making a lot of the programs used by creatives. But when job adverts asked for Adobe Photoshop, they're not just asking for someone who knows how to use practically Adobe Photoshop. Implicitly, they are asking for creative skills. And again, I would say these are the skills of the future. And the jobs of the future. So these are jobs that we see are really likely to globally grow, especially in our research based in the UK and US, but across the world. Graphic designers, photographers, audiovisual, broadcasting, artists, arts officers, producers, directors, and designers. We're seeing these both as skills in other jobs and jobs likely to grow in and of themselves. But we have some problems facing the creative industries. Creative industries jobs, it's not just a sunny story, despite how sunny this slide's color looks today. There are several issues which some of my colleagues are going to bring out in greater detail. The first, freelancers. So this is a bit of a scary slide for me, and the reason is because what it shows is what happened in the UK to freelancers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So freelancers are about a third of the UK's creative industries, and I find that in many countries around the world it's a similar level. I believe it's very similar in Turkey as well. And what you see is where that line is, a huge drop in working hours during the pandemic for freelancers. But unlike other roles in the UK, this wasn't something which was visible to policymakers. Whilst policymakers could see people who were becoming unemployed, freelancers were a little bit invisible. And the fact that globally, I don't know a single government who has policies that work for freelancers as well as they work for people who are full-time employed really makes me nervous for the individual rights and opportunities of anyone working in the creative industries. This is the other risk. It's not just the UK education system, although of course that's where I come from and so I'm using it as an example. But across the world, education systems at every level are struggling to work out what to do with creative skills, creative jobs. In many countries, including in the UK, there's a chasm between arts and creative subjects and science, technology, engineering, mathematics. You're told to pick subjects in, especially from 16 onwards in the UK, one way or the other, when everything we know about future jobs is we need people who can do both. I was someone who loved maths and arts, and at 16 I was put in exactly that position, told to pick one or the other, that there were not universities which were looking for the type of skills that I was interested in pursuing. And I know Leandro will pick up on that later. So I'm actually going to pass over to Leandro now to talk a little bit more about some of the things the agenda speaks on universities in particular. But I'd just like to leave you with this point. I believe we need policy systems globally at every level which recognize the specific needs of the creative industries and understand their true future potential. These are jobs of the future, jobs which will be needed more and more around the world, exciting skills, but they can be vulnerable jobs, and they can also be jobs that we struggle to train people for, to skill them for properly. So I can't wait to talk about all of your different experiences, to speak a little bit more with the council members. I know you're sending in questions on Slido, so please send in questions whenever you have them. And now I'm going to pass over to my colleague Leandro to pick up where I've left off.
Thank you, Eliza. I just don't know if I can get the PowerPoint control. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Eliza, for the 2 minutes left for me. And again, I live in the UK, but I have Brazilian roots, so sometimes I need 10 minutes only to say my name and what I'm thinking and doing here. So I will start by my last slides. I will do some disruption here. I'm doing the right thing?
You ruined the system.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, this is my last slide. Again, well, I will get there. Okay. Again, as I said, I'm a professor at a university, and I'm originally a professor in economics. But I was professor in economics in Brazil and France, and moved to the UK to a arts and culture school. And this was absolutely disruptive to me. And first thing I did was to write this quote outside my door in the office at the university. This quote is from John Ruskin. John Ruskin did this speech in Manchester in the absolutely effervescent moment of the Industrial Revolution, in which he says, for the perfect economist, you need to have in the right hand food and flax for life and clothing, but in the left hand, purple and needlework for honor and beauty. I think that this is absolutely symbolic, because the world is facing now one of the biggest transformations in terms of the social and economic ways of producing and consuming. And I think that it's absolutely relevant for the universities to think about how to produce a real interdisciplinary approach for the creative and cultural industries. And in my perspective, I'm sorry, I'm running out of stuff here. Can I get some help? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. In my perspective, I think that the role of the university in this scenario brought by Eliza is basically to train, to form active leaders in the social economic ecosystem of CCIs. And I'm referring to managers, policymakers, and individual entrepreneurs. And in my perspective also, it's important to have a clear definition of which sectors you are choosing to represent your specific approach for creative industries. Usually, you have some relevant elements bringing what Ruskin called food and flax. Again, high impact in GDP, high impact in number of jobs created by these sectors, but you also need to contemplate purple and needlework, beauty, honor, how culture and arts can play an important role in the decisions in the policy level who will shape the new cycle of our society, economic and social partners of production and consumption. I think that this moment is critical as was the 2 or 3 previous industrial revolutions. And on top of that, we have a pandemic, we have war, we have a big package of disruption. And creative industries are, in my perception, an important way to, is an important set of sectors that could have an important role in this transformation. And again, the university is a very particular place. Sometimes we are producing a lot of important knowledge, but by definition, we don't know very well, especially in the humanities, how to deliver applied knowledge, how to deliver techniques, how to deliver particularly knowledge exchange between university, between applied research, academic, more broad research, and also practical transformations. These different groups, they are living in different paces. We have a pace of the innovation in the markets. You have another pace of innovation policy. And the third different rhythm in how the ideas are flowing in the university. So what we are basically, in my perspective of creating programs in creative and cultural industries, I'm not advertising our program in Manchester. I'm just bringing here much more doubts and concerns about how to do something meaningful. And I think that basically we need 3 main strengths or capacities or abilities to be provided by a good program in creative and cultural industries. One of them is to understand properly what and how are the, the context of the policy, environment, and ecosystem for culture, for arts, for development. As Johanna said before, different governments are thinking in programs and also in organizations and in institutions dedicated to promote development through creative and cultural industries. But there is a history behind this. But also, we have the present context in which we need to repair the damage caused by the pandemic for the cultural and creative sectors, but we also need to think about the future. We will never get back to 2019, I'm sure, and we need to prepare the sector to a new cycle of different partners of production and consumption. I think that this is one of the first and important axes in creating a good professional emerging from the university system in creative and cultural industries. The second one is capacity of what I call here an enhanced evidence-based decision-making. And it is related to data analysis, data visualization. I think that's important to provide skills in comprehension of the reality. And there are many efforts worldwide on producing data for creative industries and using these packages of data to inform public policies, private policies, and also ONGs' strategies. And the third strand, and I think that is one of the most critical ones, I think is related to how to understand the impact of the current innovation process in different industries, part of the creative and cultural industries ecosystem. And I really like an economist called Schumpeter. And Schumpeter wrote a fascinating theory on innovation. And I think that I'm trying to produce some prototype of these different innovations and how it can be spread in different fields of creative and cultural industries. And we are living a lot of innovations now. In the productive process, we have product innovations. We have also market techniques innovations. We are living an accelerated process of transformation. And I think that if the university can deliver minds, professionals capable of delivering this sort of analysis and intervention in the real life, I think that the university can give some good contribution for the creative and cultural industries ecosystem, in policy, in planning, in practical interventions. And I think that this is something essential in the current moment, especially because even the role of the university in our lives is basically in discussion now. We have to think of how these new generations will be benefited by being in a place as a university. So these are just some reflections. I don't have any more my catchy final quotation for Ruskin. I did this in the beginning, but thank you so much, and we will keep in touch today. Thank you.
Am I going next? Great.
My
I
time
don't have
just
any
finished.
slides, and I don't have...
You have the first slide, my presentation.
Yes, I do. But I mean, that's just to talk a little bit about why we discussed about innovation and entrepreneurship as a group. Happy to pull that up.
Switch my presentation.
It's a great segue, actually, what Leandro was just talking about, the gaps that universities can fill in terms of skills, and the gaps that remain between academic research and applied research. I think it's ultimately the role of the entrepreneur to fill those gaps. And that's kind of why we really talk so much about the importance of entrepreneurs in this ecosystem. And fundamentally, I do believe that the entrepreneurs of the creative ecosystem are actually the keystone. You can have all the policies and the infrastructure and talent, but without the entrepreneur willing to take the risk, you will not have the rest of the ecosystem thriving. And with the entrepreneur comes the ability to bridge gaps in both supply and demand, but the onus of innovation to take risky experiments, to find those new ways of reaching the market or inventing new products and services, even breaking the silos and barriers between the different creative sectors, right? Combining different things to make something new happen. Inventing new business models to try and reach new markets. A great example, lots of great examples have come out in the pandemic for how entrepreneurship in the creative economy has helped for the CCIs to really survive this pandemic. Otherwise, when everything was closed, we were immediately afraid, theaters and museums and all those places will go away, so will those jobs. But that didn't happen, because innovation and entrepreneurship made sure that there was a different way to reach the market. They all went digital. They all tried to do things by bringing those experiences to the house, where we can sit in our own homes with safety and comfort and really kind of experience the same museum virtually that we couldn't go to physically. So there is a role for entrepreneurship. And while entrepreneurs, I know, as every time I speak to a creative entrepreneur, or even just a straight up technology startup, They all have so many expectations from government in terms of policy making, investment and promotion schemes, subsidies, all sorts of expectations, and they're right to expect those. But it is not, in my opinion, for the entrepreneur to wait for those things to appear. I think the entrepreneur is in the unique place to take the first move and to move fast, fail fast, to show the government what is not going to work, so that the public resources are invested in what is going to work, what is needed. And that power of experimentation is what entrepreneurship is really, in my opinion, innovation and entrepreneurship in the CCI should be focused on. It should be focused on challenging the status quo, going beyond what is possible today by being more collaborative, especially between the different creative sectors, to introduce digital where it makes sense, not just to digitize everything because that's the 21st century life that we live in, but to digitize what does make sense and to preserve the handmade and the offline, the physical, where there is a value add for that. These kinds of hybrid ways of working, hybrid ways of delivering creative and cultural services and products is, I think, where the focus of innovation and entrepreneurship should be, where the focus of government incentives for policies should be. And lastly, of course, I don't want to take too much time. I know Danny has a wonderful story to share with us, and I want to give a few minutes back to you from mine. But I would say, yes, there is a role for the government to recognize the codependency. If a society or a country or a market wants to develop its creative and cultural economies, policymakers and entrepreneurs are going to have to respect each other, play their roles as needed in the local context, where jobs creation, for example, might be a shared responsibility between governments and entrepreneurs, and they may have to play slightly different roles in making it happen. There's a lot of room for private players to come with investments to accelerate that as well. But who can go first? I think it's in the nature of entrepreneurship to take the first risk, and therefore, places like universities that are now quickly arts colleges that are also catching on to the startup accelerator incubator kind of model. There are lots of these examples coming around the world where you can go from the classroom to an R&D lab, into an incubator, and into the market in a very seamless kind of way. And we need to see more of that, which is going to require all these different actors of the ecosystem to talk to each other, to coordinate, and be more cohesive and inclusive in how they approach the opportunity to fuel CCI with more innovation and entrepreneurship. I'll pause here for now. Happy to take more questions later. But Danny, you have 5 more minutes to talk us through an amazing example of what you've been able to do in your own country.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. So I'll talk about my country, Kyrgyzstan, but I think it's an interesting case for the Global South. When we talk with my colleagues, I always ask them to distinguish the tools and methods that worked maybe for the Global North, but they might not work in the Global South, because Global South is a bit different. As you know, Global South is 3/4 of the world population, but it's only 1/5 of the world's GDP. So again, 75% of people, 20% of the world GDP. So the inequality is huge, and there is a reason for that, because Global South is institutionally a bit different. First of all, usually for many countries in the Global South, it's common to have huge and very conservative, old-fashioned bureaucracy that is not trying to develop, is more trying to save the status quo. And that's, of course, not very good for creative industries. Second, usually Global South economies, they have extractive or they have industrial economies. The structure of economy is a bit different. It's less service-oriented, it's less knowledge-oriented, creative industries-oriented. Global South usually has lower civic engagement, and in our International Advisory Council, I'm the only person from the post-Soviet countries, and maybe that's why colleagues, you don't know, but the words policy and politics in Russian are the same word. So it means usually that once someone is trying to promote some policy, people think he's going to politics. And that's something that keeps many people away from trying to promote policies. And fourth, usually in the Global South, we don't have data. We don't have reliable stats. And so it's very difficult to map. It's very difficult to measure the impact of creative economy. In my country, they once tried to do it, and they figured out that the creative economy is less than 1% of the GDP of the country. I'm sure it's more, but the biggest part of creative economy is the informal sector. Like my colleagues have researched, more than 60% of economies are informal sectors, especially in the creative industries everywhere in the Global South. And number 5, the good side of Global South is that I think because of all difficulties, the entrepreneurs in Global South are more resilient. They are more innovative. They try to make experiments. They have to. And myself, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm happy to talk about entrepreneurship. And in Kyrgyzstan, which is a small country, 7 million population, starting from the next year, as planned, we will have maybe the most favorable tax regime for all creative industries in the world. And this happened because, by the way, British Council was so active in Central Asia, and we all learned about creative economy from there. 5 years ago, I didn't know that creative economy term existed. Now, in our region, everyone is talking about creative economy because we all see that creative economy has potential to speed up development. And like you will see my colleague Edna, who was heading the UNCTAD's group that was creating creative economy report for the world in 2008 and 10. And Edna shared with me that the initial idea was to help developing countries to speed up. That was the message. So sometimes in my country and in Global South, I hear that people say that creative economy is about rich countries. Let them play this YouTube, Instagram, and all that. We are going to extract. Agriculture is important, all that. But no, creative economy is more meaningful, more important for Global South than for Global North, because we need to catch up. So in my country, we were able to promote this because the association that we created, Association of Creative Industries, was able to lobby a new law on Creative Industries Park, which is a special tax regime, as I said. I will talk about it. And the law is already signed, and we are working on the bylaws. So we are very close to launching this thing. And why it's extremely important is because, we know this diffusion of innovation curve that Everett Rogers drew, 50 years ago. And he was saying that every nation has this 2.5% of people who are innovators. They take risks. They want to experiment. They don't want to do old-fashioned things. They want to try their own way. And these people are crucial for, to create innovations. We understand that in today's world, you want to have rich country, you need more innovators. But innovators, they need early adopters, people who are kind enough to give feedback, to help, to adopt new technologies, who like new technologies. And the problem with Global South is that usually these innovators and early adopters are moving outside of the country. They leave our countries, they go to the Global North, then they create innovations there, then Global South imports those innovations. And of course, with this loop, Global South will always stay very poor, and it will never catch up if we don't solve this problem. So we need to create the special conditions. My own business, Ololo, is a group of co-working spaces and co-living spaces. So we create these creative hubs where we do a lot of events, and we are now involving more than 1,000 individuals, creative individuals, who work and live in our premises. And it's more than 27,000 square meters. And I think all Global North should focus on creating creative hubs. This is very, very important because we need to create these safe spaces for innovators and early adopters. And once you have this, you can build cooperation, you can build collaboration that Jai was talking about between these creative entrepreneurs. And when they get together, when they realize they should not compete, maybe they are competing with someone, but at the same time they can cooperate, they can collaborate, and they can be clients to each other. Then magic can happen. So in our case, we invented this thing that we call Creative Industries Park. We called it so not because park means a certain place, but because we have this case of high-tech park, which is a special tax regime for all IT companies. And it exists in my country for more than 10 years. And the high-tech park is considered as a very, very successful project where the government, provided almost zero taxation for all IT companies that are exporting. And the IT companies are growing very, very fast. And so we understood that if we use the same name and we say, let's do the same thing, but for all creative industries, it will be easier if we call it a park. But this is not a place. You register in this special organization which will be, administering this Creative Industries Park, and then you can work in any part of the country. You don't have to be in a certain building, in a park or somewhere. The Creative Industries Park includes more than 80 activities. It includes all the creative industries and certain professions in these industries. And with High-Tech Park, we had this export condition. The company's revenue should be coming mostly from the export. 80% of the revenue should be coming from export. And that, prevents startups from joining the High-Tech Park, because when you create a startup, first people you start selling are your friends and families. Immediately, you are not eligible, to join High-Tech Park because you're not exporting. So with Creative Industries Park, we don't have this condition of export. With High-Tech Park, the VAT and the profit taxes are zero. In our case, because we don't have this export condition, we were negotiating with the government, and the government proposed us very low tax, and we agreed to do that for that tax, which will be about 2% of the revenues, but it will grow gradually. So it will start with 0.5%, then it will be 1% for 2 years, and only then it will be 2% since 2027. The membership fee, so the creative entrepreneurs registered in the park will be paying 1% of their revenue to the park, but the park will use this money to promote creative economy, to arrange hackathons, to arrange events, awards, and all the other things that are important. So the income tax will be lower. Social funds, which is also another type of income tax from the salaries of your employees, will be much lower. And the most important thing is that in our case, this will be administered by an NGO, not by a government agency, which will provide much more flexibility. So, as you know, the problem with creative industries, measuring creative industries in Global South, is that companies are in the informal sector. You cannot really take their numbers, and they don't want to show their numbers, and they don't want to participate in the surveys because they want to hide. They are afraid to show their numbers. But in this case, these companies will come and register themselves. They will be happy to show their numbers because they want to be outside of informal economy. They want to pay taxes. They just want to pay reasonable taxes. So this allowed us to define creative industries immediately because, we didn't go through this long academic, conflicts, discussions, what we should continue, what we should count as creative economy. We just said, okay, whatever we include into this, let's count it as creative industries. If it works well, let's add other industries as well. Then, of course, it will allow us to measure the growth of creative industries. And Jay gave me a few more minutes, right? So I'll talk 2 more minutes. So if you have numbers of these creative entrepreneurs, of course, you can see how their numbers are growing over the years. Yes, the informal economy will reduce, but also you'll have resources to promote and develop creative economy ecosystem. And what's maybe the most important thing is that there is so much talk about creative economy, creative professions, creative industries in my country. It's becoming fashionable for the young people. And it's very important for their parents, to hear that, okay, maybe it makes sense, because previously they were saying, stop this stupid work, go to the bank, do some normal work. You don't need this creative stuff. This is ridiculous. You will not make any money. Now their parents are hearing that if you want to make good money in my country, you should go to creative professions. This is very meaningful. And last slide, why the Creative Industries Association succeeded with promoting this. There were a number of factors, but I'm sure these factors might exist in your countries as well. I see here many colleagues from the post-Soviet countries. what's the most important is to build this competition. You know, when the companies, creative companies that consider each other as competitors are ready to work together. So in case of Creative Industries Association, we say, yes, you become a member, you start paying the membership fee in the association. It doesn't mean that the association is serving you. It doesn't mean you're getting something from the association. It only means that you've bought the entrance ticket, you come on our boat, and you start working together with us. If you don't work, the work becomes heavier for all the rest of us. So you should work, you should publish in the social media, you should talk about creative economy, you should give interviews, you should go for the presentations with the universities. So we have more than 60 companies that are paying this membership fee now, and they're all very active. Second, the association was focused on one target, to promote this Creative Industries Park, to lobby it, and we didn't, we didn't take other targets, we just focused on one. The agenda is positive. In countries like mine, we all need good news. And most of the news are really bad. Unfortunately, yesterday I heard very bad news from my country last time. And the only maybe light spots, and people do need hope. People need to hear that something good is happening in their country. The only light spot is creative industries. So we are feeling this niche, and that's why it helps us to spread the word. We look much bigger than we are at the moment. And creative entrepreneurs, usually they're very active on social media. They are very influential. When they talk, more people hear them. Sometimes much bigger businesses are less vocal. Less people follow them, less people listen to them. And also it's very challenging times because of the war in Ukraine, and it's terrible, and it's terrible for the whole world, and especially for the post-Soviet countries. Everything is turning very, very black. And during these times, the governments should become more creative. So they are looking for new solutions. It's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to group up, talk to the governments, promote the agenda. So, and also it was quite easy to convince our government. We told them, yes, these taxes will be low, but you're not collecting any taxes from creative entrepreneurs anyway. So collect some taxes, it's a win-win. That people will not pretend they don't exist. You will not pretend you want to take all the taxes. Just take this little portion, but you will get something. So it was a win-win. And yes, we had this high-tech park. That's why we could build on this lesson. In your countries, I'm sure some other cases exist that you can build upon. And I hope this Creative Industries Park will be successful, and I hope many other countries, especially in the post-Soviet area, will copy this. Let's build this creative economy together. Thank you.
And just a reminder, if you have questions as we go along, please put them in on Slido or vote for your favorite questions. We've got 2 more presentations, and then we're all going to have a discussion. So don't forget your questions in the meantime.
So hello, everybody. My name's Avril. I'm from South Africa. And I'm going to be speaking about informality, and I'm going to also be speaking about a particular case study of the live music sector in South Africa. And I think that, just to a good segue from what we've heard from Dan, is that the fault lines of the creative economy were shown up by the COVID pandemic. It's not a benign economy. Not everything that happens in the creative economy is wonderful. And we need to recognize the huge challenges that exist, specifically for workers, for the informal economy, for freelancers, and that's really been the focus of a lot of the work that I've been doing. It's really the live music industry in South Africa, like all other live music industries across the globe, it's especially during COVID, was a real struggle to be able to perform, to keep going. We have terrible stories about musicians selling really precious instruments just to survive, to put food on the table. And a large study that I've done with colleagues across the African continent was about decent work. Decent work as an ILO concept. There are 10 indicators for decent work, to explore to the extent to which we can find decent work in the culture and creative economy of Africa. And we looked at live music in South Africa, dance in the DRC, fashion in Tanzania, film and video in Nigeria, and cultural heritage in Egypt. And To be honest, evidence of decent work just simply doesn't exist. Number one, we don't really have employers. We don't have employer associations. Who does a creative person work for? They work for themselves. Who's going to insist that there's decent working conditions? Who's going to insist on fair labor? Who's on fair labor practice? Who's going to insist on safe working conditions? Who's going to ensure that there's fairness in your your pay? It's going to be up to your status. If you're a wonderful musician and you've got a presence on social media, you can command a higher fee. If you don't and you're an emerging artist, you command the fee that you get. The market is going to dictate, because there's nobody protecting you. So the level of social protection in an industry like the live music industry simply doesn't exist, which brings the importance of the role of the public sector. You cannot have our sectors, especially in the global south, and now I'm talking about Africa in particular, as a very different global south to what you were talking about, Dan, which is dominated by informality. The bulk of our work, more than 60%, of our economic activity on the African continent is the informal economy, right? It is under the radar of the state. By definition, people don't want to be seen by the state either, or they don't want to bother with the bureaucracy of what it means to be part of a regulated environment. And often it's because they're doing it initially because it's wonderful to do it. They're just happy to do it. They've still got to have another job because you can't make a living being an artist or a creative on the continent of Africa. So why register yourself as a creative person or a creative business if you might actually go from one day being a musician to the next day you're doing visual arts and the next day you're doing a commercial because you can earn some money, and then you go back to being a performer? What should you register yourself as? So the question of the informal economy is that sometimes it's a choice by virtue of the fact that the sector is not definable. Yes, we have these wonderful statistics that come out of the DCMS in the UK, but do they really apply to countries like mine? You know, can we really say that we fit into these boxes? And do we have the level of our occupations and structure that you find in the global north? And the real answer is no. So, you know, I don't know, I think I've got to the last slide somehow. I don't know how this happened. Let's start there. And then go there. No. So the 10 indicators are employment opportunities. That's number one. Are there employment opportunities? That's a sign of decent work. Well, are there employment opportunities? Well, work in the cultural and creative industries is seasonal, it's project-based, and workers in live music in particular are engaged in other work or diverse jobs as well in order to earn a living. They cannot earn a living only from live music. So employment opportunities, not really. Number two, adequate earnings. Well, livelihoods are really possible. Some people can earn a really good fee for a gig that they do today. But when is the next gig? And how long must the money for that gig last? So performing still remains a dominant form of income for all musicians on the African continent. It's not recorded music. It's live performance. That's the main earning potential. And they often have to combine that with other forms of earnings from the live music industry, such as fees, branding, merchandising, royalties, and sync deals. Combining work, family, and personal life, that's a sign of decent work. It doesn't exist. It can't. It's deeply disturbed in the live music industry because when do you perform live music? It's a night or the weekend. So if you're a woman with children, your family life is going to be deeply disturbed, even if you're a man. You know, so that ability to have that level of that indicator present is not really there. Work that should be abolished. Well, there's a lot of child labor, a lot of dangerous work happening in the culture and creative industries. And there are really exploitative conditions that exist, especially in the informal sector. Decent working time is another indicator. Well, there's real differential experiences depending on venue size. So the big companies that have these big concerts, they are established, they bring in international artists, and yes, there is great occupational health and safety, the staging is done properly, nobody's going to fall through the the stage, the roof's not going to fall down, you know, you're going to be protected. You're going to have changing rooms for men and for women that are differentiated. You're going to have all those conditions well done. But in a smaller venue, in the smaller venues as you go down the level, even if it's a dedicated live music venue, doesn't mean it's going to have decent work. Some do, some don't. Some have contracts, some work on word of mouth. Even some musicians don't want to sign a contract. They say, you're going to send me a contract, where am I going to print it? I don't have a printer at home, you know. So I'll take your word for it. It's okay. I'll be there. You say 3 o'clock, I'll be there. Then you have smaller venues even, like bars or shebeens or the streets or whatever. There's absolutely zero decent working conditions in those places. Stability and security of work, another major indicator for the ILO. Well, it's a real impossibility to have that stability and security of work when you're working on a sector that is dominated by freelancing, where you really, the number of people that work informal establishments, it's really the cultural managers. It's the people I'm training, you know, in the university. I'm training people to be cultural managers or policy advisors. They get the work in a formal place with a proper contract and that. But the people they're working for and the reason they exist, those people don't have decent work. Equal opportunities are really absent for women, as I've mentioned, in the live music industry in particular. In South Africa, we have a real problem with gender-based violence. The statistics are so shocking, I'm not even going to say them, because every 4 minutes, a woman is getting raped, and a child. And so women working at night, we don't have public transport, we don't have secure streets. What does it mean for a woman? And the reason that people do the work is because they love it. And that's the thing about culture and creative work, is that it's done as out of passion. It's out of joy that you get from performing, from doing that work. Safe working environments often require negotiation. It's up to the person how strong they are to talk about what's safety things. So I know quite a few agents who work on behalf of women musicians who negotiate specific safety things. If there isn't a changing room for a woman, they have a special tent that they can bring along, or that sort of thing. These things are so small and so minor, but they impact on people's enjoyment and safety and sense of this is a decent livelihood. Social protection, this is a problem. The freelancers are not really included in the definition of employee. So in our labor relations laws, in South Africa, I'm very proud to say we have a fantastic constitution and fantastic labor relations laws. You know, you're guaranteed the right to strike, your protection against bad employers is really high, but not for the culture and creative sector. Why? Because it's based on freelancing. And until we include freelancing in the definition of employee, those people are not protected by basic unemployment insurance or maternity benefits. And we saw that during COVID. People couldn't access the COVID recovery funds because they weren't registered in the system. So we do have a South African Labour Law Reform Commission that is now working on including freelancing into the definition of employee, which will make a huge difference for our whole sector, all across all the cultural domains, which is really exciting, and supported by our union, the trade union for musicians. And the last one is social dialogue. Well, social dialogue, we've heard how important it is. Talking from Leandro to Jay, everybody's mentioned the importance of coming together, discussing, and having representative bodies. There's no employer body to talk to, even if you've got a union. So we have a union, but who do you talk to? There's no employer body association of live music venues or of the culture and creative industries, generally. And so this level of embryonic development of the culture and creative industries really is not in our favor. And in order to change that, we have to be thinking about what is the role of the public sphere. And sorry, these slides are very strange. I don't know what's going on here. I want to get to the last one, because that was about the assessment. I know I'm out of time. I'm going to talk about four quick things. We need to focus urgently on social protection for freelancers across, specifically in the Global South. And one of them is a definition of employees. The other one is what can the state do to support that? What is the role of the public sphere? We need to change the definition. We need to start a process of engagement with unions, representative organizations, to develop fair standards for collective bargaining. And that includes everything from rates, working conditions, occupational health and safety standards, and so on. We need to strengthen intermediaries. We need a buffer between the informal economy and the freelancing world of the culture and creative industries and the state. There's loads of money slushing around many of our governments, but the ability to access those funds requires organization. We're never going to organize the informal sector. It's growing, it's not diminishing. It's been growing over the last 20 years on the African continent. This is not a diminishing part of our problem. This is a growing part of our problem. And we have to recognize it and acknowledge it and work out how we're going to deal with it. And intermediaries are needed from higher education institutions. We are a fantastic intermediary. Groups like Atelier that we met yesterday, amazing intermediary. Intermediaries for finance. Hiva Fund, George is not here, from Kenya, runs the most amazing intermediary to access funds. We need intermediaries for union. A union is a very good intermediary. A park is a very good intermediary. We need more of those intermediary organizations in all of our countries to support the culture and creative industries. And we really need to work with national, local, public agencies to facilitate, for me, the live music sector in multiple spaces, and to collect data that allows us to understand how big the problem is. I'm talking from deep experience over too many years to mention, but we don't have the data that I see that you can put up. Eliza, it's amazing, all that data. How do you know that? We just know it from action. And so thank you very much for the opportunity.
I'm going to stop. Hello, everybody. Great to be here. So, building on, it's great to be last speaker after this distinguished panelist. Academics, I'm not an academic and I'm not an artist, so a lot of disclaimers. So, but I'm building on what's been said. So most of the work we do is action research. So I'm an urbanist. We start by observing urban phenomena in the street, and then we start to build empirical research, and out of that recognize opportunity and propose ideas on solutions. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what we try to do. So there are maybe two premises based on what's been said. A, recognizing informality, urban informality, as a big chunk of our cities in the global south, has been said already, and that calls for redefining creative sector or creative economy beyond the Richard Florida classic definition. And the second proposition is what would be our role as actor and creative actors and artists and architects in this part that is not mapped, that is not recognized. So this is the two things that I would like to talk about. So how do I do this? All right. So Cairo is like Istanbul. It's a 20 million city. It's a mega city, and it's multi-layered, more complex as any other city. But there are like three main conditions that it shares with many cities in the global south. The city deteriorating urban core, the historic center, multi-layered, complex, planned, etc. But it's going through disinvestment, deterioration, decay, but also gentrification. Second condition is what we call informal housing area, which is a belt of informal housing surrounding Cairo, like many other cities in Africa and Latin America and South Asia. And this in Cairo constitutes 70%, 70, 2/3 of the housing stock is self-built, without architects, without planners. So it's a red box. Nobody knows how, and everybody characterizes it as chaotic and random, etc. It's not. It has some logic, but we just don't understand it. And then the third pattern is the response to that, which is building new districts, new suburbs out in the desert. That's very unsustainable, as we all know. So what do we do with that as architects? How can we engage this informal, the 70% of our cities? The first thing we need to do is try to develop tools to research it, to understand how it works, what kind of order, what kind of logic. And the second is what would be different ideas to propose in this area to improve the quality of life. So I'm going to be a little bit. So again, so the problem is, I think all the slides are cropped, but it's too late now. this duality between how the city is being represented and how where most of the people live is something that Cairo shared with many cities in the global south. We've been looking at some creative ideas in informal areas from the micro scale of people building small steps to overcome traffic road to more big projects that also built informally, such as infrastructure work like ramps, etc. Again, in the meantime, the city is embarking on this phantasmoric kind of vision, like Cairo 2050, that's completely disconnected from reality. And this is example of, the benchmark being Dubai and Singapore, etc., is completely different from the issues that we're talking about. So we've been looking at ways to understand and measure these informal practices. I'm going to move a little faster. So our work is either at the city center or at the informal area. So a couple of projects in the city center to measure informality is looking at street vendors. It's a phenomenon that Egypt shares with many cities, and how the street vendors who occupy the sidewalk could be an entry point to understand the contested space, public space, or the sidewalk being the interface between the public and the private realm. So we developed a lot of tools to look at street vendors like time-lapse photography and developing way to measure and understand the code regulation that govern this seemingly random or unregulated condition. And looking at this contested space and try to understand, disentangle the stakeholders in public space in absence of a formal participatory mode of governance. So these are some of the diagrams we developed to understand the different stakeholders in the sidewalk. Taking that analysis and then put it in a sort of action. So this is another project we did in downtown called Downtown Passageway, looking at the city center, not from the main street, but from the back alleys and interstices and courtyards, and try to find in this network an alternative and more inclusive and diverse public space, but really looking at the role of art as an urban catalyst to regenerate this leftover spaces, but doing so through the stakeholder analysis that we developed through the analysis with the street vendors. So before we did any design, we started to talk to the different residents, store owners, street vendors, women groups, heritage protection groups, traffic, etc., and ask each one of them what would you like to see in this passageway and what are the concerns are. And out of this matrix of do's and don'ts, we developed a design brief, and the role of the design here is try to negotiate a middle ground with these being conflicted interests. So it's exercise of urban diplomacy or urban democracy, if you will. And before we left, we set up a board for this passageway. We invited each building to nominate one person, and we made a maintenance plan, asked him to take over the maintenance. And we're almost 8 years after. This is some of the images of what the community does in the space, organizing iftar in Ramadan, putting decoration during Christmas and Eid, etc. And that space became very fashionable, an attraction point, almost Instagrammable point downtown. So this is really an example of how can we start by observing everyday urban informal practice and then turn it into design intervention. Now, in the informal areas, there are a couple of things we're trying to do. This is a project we did with the University of Zurich and ETH in 2016. Again, trying to understand how this red district, how does it evolve? So we start by looking at how the land is divided, who are the actors, who decide the width of the street, the height of the building, the location of the courtyard, etc. These are all very calculated and rational decisions. They're not random. Also looking at the construction system, the building material, it's the cash flow, and out of this knowledge, you start to develop very sensitive solutions. So each student were asked to do a very small design proposal to enhance the quality of living, the environmental quality, without, and that's the key point, without disrupting the ecosystem. So this is very different from the state approach, which is about raising to the ground this area and building towers. So here we're trying to work with the system, with the informal, but doing a little bit of creative, innovative ideas with the community. The second project, very quickly, is looking at this division between the formal and informal and try to challenge this duality. So our cities are not actually either formal or informal, they are actually all the time a mix of formal and informal. So within the city center is informality and vice versa. So instead of looking at the city as sort of schizophrenic, we're trying to look at the formal informal as a spectrum, as a journey of new, more nuanced and more complex experience. So to do that, so this is a classic blue and red map of the city, but in practice, we said, okay, so what about we think of a journey of a person, hypothetical journey of a person who lives out at the city fringe, but this person goes to the city center to finish a paperwork, to renew their ID, for example. So we looked at this journey through the multiple modes of transportation, from the tuk-tuk to the microbus to the metro, and in each mode of transportation, we start to measure and quantify the level of informality and formality by looking at economy, by looking at structure, by looking at actors. For example, the tuk-tuk almost operates 100% informal. The ticket is negotiated, the routes are not regulated, the driver may be not even, it could be like underage person. The only part that is formal in the tuk-tuk is the gasoline, because you have to purchase from the gas station. And the other end of the spectrum, the metro is almost 100% regulated, standardized, the timing, the station, the ticket, but there's a bit of informality, including street vendor in the metro, etc. So there's a little video, but I don't think I'll have time. I'm going to skip the video. But we did almost like animation to represent this journey from one end of the spectrum to the other. You can go to our website and watch the video. But the last project I want to see in the last minute or two that I have, I'm going to skip the video, is a current space that we started in one of these informal areas called El Fabrica. So the neighborhood, as you can see, is very vibrant, it's very industrious, it's full of energy and full of crafts. So the space is located in this neighborhood. The idea behind which it started out as a maker space, as a creative lab, but it became much more than that. It became a space of encounter between art students and designers who are formally trained. They have a formal mode of knowledge, and craftspeople from the neighborhood, carpenters, metal workers, glass workers, leather workers, etc. So through a number of series of workshops, we bring students and designers to work in the neighborhood with craftspeople to produce. This is the key thing. They're not just talking, they're producing street furniture. They go to junkyards, they scavenge old material and old piece of furniture and start to produce new ideas. So here is a workshop on street furniture. You can see they're working with like very basic material, recycled wood. This one with working with artists to transform the facade of the businesses to make it more marketable and more visible. This is an example. This is again street furniture. You can see there's a mix of very formal and technical drawing along with very ground and practical knowledge. This is about sound mapping, and lastly is a signage. We're kind of redesigning the signs of the shops, looking at typography and fonts, etc. And the last thing that we're doing currently, this is very important going back to what's been said, there's an absence of data in informal area. There's no statistics, there are no basically any information. So the way to start to think about this, to have any meaningful impacts, try to understand the extent of the magnitude of the economy. So this is a pilot project we're doing by literally going with each street and locating each shop and ask them whether they would like to be on this directory or not, and then putting all this index, making it. So this is, for example, just a couple of pages. This is upholstery. This is aluminum shops. There are many. There are carpentry. But they're not only mapping the location of the business and the type of work, but we're also looking at the processes of production. What are the requirements? What are the safety issues? What are the spatial and temporal factors that are successful to this work? And then we're also looking at the supply chain. So, for example, the lumber yard where they purchase the wood and then it's being cut and processed and then assembled and then polished and then marketed. So who are the different actors in this, and what kind of modes of transportation, and what is the width of the street that allows for a truck to pass, etc. So all these kind of little details allow us to understand better how this informal economy and creativity in that operates. And then building on that, and this is the last two slides I promise, is selecting, we have in this case like 15 craftsmen from the different trades, and then 15 artists, product designer and furniture designer, and bringing together to design together pieces of furniture that are a bit of open new markets for these craftsmen, so promote their business, but also allow these also designers to source their designs from the neighborhood rather than going outside. So this is just examples of some of the research phase. This is some of the designers proposing some of their ideas. And you can see some of the inspiration coming from the Informal. So, to conclude, in each of our projects, whether design or research or exhibition, at the end of each project, we have a very interesting exercise. We start to map out where did we source, whether the products or the knowledge in each part of this project. So, and then we put it in a map, and we realize that all the time, every element of this project is distributed across the city with a bit of formality and informality. And that sort of gives us a more nuanced and complex understanding of the city as intermingled and interconnected spheres of formality and informality. So I'm going to close here, and you can watch the video on our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I believe we have time for some questions. I know we're running a little bit behind, but I hope that people have been sending in questions. I think I might need the clicker, I'm not sure. Have you been sending in questions on? Great. Here are some Slido questions. So I'm going to ask panels, I'm going to pick on some of our panel members. I hope they'll forgive me. The first question is, Createch is no doubt so important and formed critical mass, but how to catch the skills in no critical mass fields, like Web3 in the creative and cultural industries, and avoid context dependency? So I'm going to broaden this question a little bit, and I'm going to ask colleagues what they think. It's certainly the case that when we're thinking about the skills we need, it's easy to get caught up with those jobs, which there are many of, and that's really what my presentation focused on. But every discussion we've heard here today is also about the importance of the minority, whether that's Danny talking about early innovation, or Omar speaking about hidden informality, or Avril in the same way talking about hidden people. And so I suppose, how does the panel think that we can find, whether it's highly technical innovators or whether it's other people that are sort of hidden because there are fewer of them, and make sure that they get the support and promotion that they need? Perhaps I'll go to Danny first to talk about some of those early innovators, maybe in technologies like Web3. We talked a lot in the council about AI. How do you make sure that you're finding those people, of whom there are so few?
Yeah, it's interesting, yeah. But for countries like mine, Web3 introduces a unique opportunity because the whole world is only learning how to work there. It's not somewhere where we are very, very far behind. And I think it's very hard to find those people. Instead, you need to create the special conditions like this tax relief or creative hubs, great events like this one, and they will come. That's the only way, I think. And
Build it and they'll come.
And it's the most ecological way, I would say, not to be pushy. And then to learn from them and maybe build on what's stronger, because in many cases we try to not leave those who are behind. But in creative industries especially, I think it's very important to strengthen what's already strong. That's the very important approach, I think.
And Leandro, in terms of, you have a specialist course which you run, how do you balance between providing very specific skills one person needs and the broader, more generic skills that lots of people need, whether that's, in your case, creative industries policy, or if you're talking about the kind of forefront of tech?
Well, this is absolutely challenging, especially because the specialisms usually required are related to some sectoral knowledge. And there are differences, of course, between what people need in terms of policies, tools for performing arts and design, for example. And I think that the best way to find a common ground is to understand how are the interactions between the sector. I think that this can be a good clue.
So by providing lots of courses that can interact, you can actually give people an opportunity to study something almost unique in the round, but through established departments. That makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Avril?
want to add to that question. I also teach at university, and we recently did we've done a study of our graduates, and not just our graduates for the last 10 years, but also the sector that's employed our graduates, which is the culture and creative industries. And we asked them what skills they valued the most, what abilities and attributes they valued the most. And the interesting thing was they didn't specify any content. They said curiosity, passion, critical thinking, a knowledge that anything you need to know, you can find out. Networking, that ability to network. In our sector, without a network, you're nothing, because it's all about collaborative work. The entire sector is based on teamwork, non-hierarchical work, networks of knowledge, of practice, access. And so they all said, we want your students to, when they come into our workplaces or our hubs or our collection society organizations, anywhere they come, the most important thing is not what they know. It's they know a lot of people, they know how to nurture those relationships, and they are curious and passionate. And I thought that was really fundamental. Also, at a university, you're teaching, theoretical, robust, research. You're not teaching practical skills. So one of the things that we've come up with is at a younger level, the undergraduates, people get an internship to learn some practical skills. But the postgrad level, my students all have jobs already. So you can't put them in an internship because they're already working. So what we've come out of this research to recognize is that the practical skills should be almost like a parallel program alongside the robust theoretical academic thinking, strategy, sort of understanding how research works, different forms of research, and so on. So what we're going to be doing starting next year, in fact, is once a month practical input from one of the people that we interviewed, who've all said they would love to come and talk to our students about something in particular. How do you do monitoring and evaluation? Why is it, how do you run an event? What are the important things to think about when you run an event? Host a big jazz festival or whatever it is. How do you read a budget, an annual report? And what do you make of and why is it important? So we're going to have all these people who are doing the work already to come into our students to let them actually be aware of the importance of it, not necessarily how to do it. Because that practical skill can only be learned in the workplace. So I think that's an important distinction between what is the role of a university and also then what is the role of people who are running training, education programs that are for adults outside of university. There's a need for all of that. This is a sector that needs lifelong learning. Every year there's something new to understand. I'm still getting my head around AI and VR and whatever those words are. And I'll never catch up to the younger generation who just know it instinctively. And that's the thing, that if we want to stay present in the sector and recognize what's going on, we never stop learning.
And I'd love to I've got two different questions, but I think they're related, so I'll ask them both together. So first of all, Jay, I wonder if you could comment on really building on what Avril said in terms of, you work for a really digital company. It's pretty much as tech within the creative industries as you can get. So in a minute, I'll ask you to comment on whether you find that the skills that you're kind of most looking for are all these digital skills, or what other soft skills you need. And then, Omar, I'd like to come to you with a question which has come up, which is about education beyond the formal system. So some of the communities that you're working with are not working with formal education systems, but of course, you show teaching and training is happening. So if you could, after Jay spoken, just comment a little bit more on that, I think that'd be really valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Eliza. Actually, that's a great question. I didn't know any Salesforce before I joined Salesforce. They still hired me. I knew other things. The great thing is with technology, it's so easy. There's like 7 different ways in which I can learn how to use Salesforce. The first one is actually given to me by Salesforce itself. There's an e-learning platform we've built because we're a tech company, we can build things. So they built the product, and then they built a platform to teach you how to use the product. So now you don't need the company to do anything. You can just log in, and you can learn for free, and you can use for free as well. As you start scaling up, then you've got to start paying up, and all that's the business side of things. But I do innovation and design strategy work at Salesforce, which has nothing to do with technology. And it's really about applying that technology to solve a human problem. That's, I think, what Avril was also trying to say is about you need, and Leandro earlier when he was talking about in his presentation about developing creative thinking as well as critical thinking. And I think the role of any professor, mentor, advisor, whatever we're trying to do with each other, even as co-opetition entrepreneurs or peers who are trying to do peer learning, I think the role is actually to distinguish between when you need to do which one, creative or critical thinking, and that's what we need to teach. That's the skill we need to build. Ultimately, my personal favorite skill is the skill to learn. I was very fortunate at a younger age in my life. I discovered my preferred method of learning. How do I absorb information? How do I utilize that information to put something back of value out into the world? This is something I don't think any school or academic institution ever teaches a student. Students are left to figure this out on their own, and the smart ones do. It takes a lifetime to figure that out. It's a very reflective internal question, and the answer is different for each one of us. And so I think when it comes, which is also the same distinction, actually, there's another question over there, Eliza, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
It's about digital products, which are tools.
Yeah, this is the one I was thinking of with my question.
Exactly.
Exactly
So
right.
I'll read the question out. I think digital products are the tools we might use or not use, but the skills we have to gain are different. So how do you distinguish between these two? And I think that in the world of innovation, about 10, 15 years ago, this was a very big question, just to bring the awareness of what is the difference between invention and innovation. And I think that's the question right there, is that the tools that we build, like there are people who are inventing new technologies, and then there are people who are innovating based on those technologies. So somebody made blockchain, but then on that somebody else made the Bitcoin, or somebody made Web3, and now we have a whole, metaverse. And I would love to see Dan's creative park in the metaverse soon, so that I don't have to always go physically to that place, right? And so these are the kinds of skills I think that when we are talking about, even in the blurring of lines between formal and informal, there's an amazing opportunity for us to distinguish between what is a practical skill that do I know how to draw, and then the other is, do I know what to do with the drawing I've made? I think that
it's a great segue, I think, over to Omar. If you could talk about the challenges when formal education isn't an option or isn't the right option.
Yeah. Okay, so just to maybe as an introduction to this point, maybe I wasn't very articulate in the beginning. I think the way we understand informality as creativity, because it sort of emerges from the fact that unlike informal, the creative sector that emerged in the global north in the 80s and 90s as part of the shift from the industrial to post-industrial economy, in the global south, the deregulation and the withdrawal of the state, the response to that was people finding solution to their own everyday problem, from transportation to housing to infrastructure, etc. So informality was in fact in the global south a creative solution in response to new liberal paradigm. So that's a very basic kind of proposition. Now the second point is, what do you do to that? How do you respond to that? So there are basically two responses in our countries. One is outright dismissal. These are informal areas, these are chaotic, they are slums, so let's remove them and build a brave new world, as we can see in some of the images. The other response is, this is what the community wants, let's just leave them do what they want. This is also a very romantic approach, and it's very slippery slope because this area also there's a lot of issues of power relation, violence, so not really ideal. So there should be a balance between in the two positions, critical engagement. So that critical engagement, it has two steps, and that goes back to your question, training. First, you need to understand how it works. So what are the skill sets that you need to learn in university to be able to understand, to analyze, to unlock how these practices are taking place. Then the second skill set, and what would be a role for you as an artist or creative actor to be part of this change. And I think there is something also important, to not to assume that we're all, idealists. I mean, it's not just about being progressive or activists who want to change the world. It's actually out of self-interest to have a role in the majority of your city. Otherwise, as an architect, I would be limiting myself to the 5% who want to build a villa or a mall or a tower, etc. So if we want to be really active in our cities, I need to find a way to be part of the majority. So in that sense, our universities, our curriculum needs to actually, as you said, developed in a way to engage this informal area in a meaningful and respectful way, sensitive way.
That's great. And I think we have time just really for sort of one or two more questions. And I'm going to cheekily combine 3 questions I've seen. So the first question was on establishing frameworks for fair collaboration between actors with different powers, whether countries or institutions, stakeholders. The second was very specifically within the context of Egypt and some of those power dynamics that have emerged with the demolishing of old districts and how can people have influence. And the third was a question very specifically building on Danny's, which was, what are your top tips for effectively working with the policymakers who you've successfully managed to lobby? So I think what we're going to do is actually combine those 3 together, and I'm going to allow the panel to choose at which level they want to give their advice, whether they want to go global south talking to the global north, or whether they want to talk about me talking to a policymaker. And I'm going to ask each one to kind of give a single tip in the last few minutes that we have. So who'd like to kick off?
May I?
Leandro, yeah, we'll go this way then. Great.
I just will pick up this one on Global South and Global North. I have a bit of experience in working in the Global South context and the Global North context. And I think that sometimes in the Global South you have more ways to produce from the ground new policies for creative and cultural industries, especially because you have less prepared structures in terms of how to develop strengths in the governmental departments, areas. And sometimes in the Global North, it's much more difficult to move players, to move institutions, and to create the new. So I think that internally, there are a sort of a equality of power, but how, in the level of the interaction between these two groups of stakeholders, I think that co-creation is the key. I think that the Global South has a lot to teach to Global North and the other way around. And I think that co-creation is the key point, how to learn together, because, I don't know, at least in my perspective, I think that the challenges are quite the same in Global South and Global North. What changes is some particular intensities in some specific elements, but the problems are quite the same.
Jay, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I do. I think it's funny. I was trying to pick which level do I want to answer. So thank you for the choice and the confusion.
They're all excellent questions. So,
but really, actually, I just thought if I were to do either one, what would I do? And the immediate thought was I would probably do the same thing in both cases.
Right.
If I was in a forum like this where we're having very high-level conversations, or if I was in a closed-door meeting with somebody of influence, what I would try to keep in mind, at least for myself, is inclusivity, tolerance, and persistence. I think this kind of a mindset is what is required. It gets a lot more done. It might take a little longer, a little more effort, but it'll get more done. Inclusivity, tolerance, and persistence. So whether you're talking at high levels, small levels, just keep doing it.
Danny, do you want to?
Yeah, to add to that, what Jerash and Leandro said, actually, I can say that, in the global south, in many places, we have a situation where the governments and people are enemies, openly speaking, frankly speaking. And when we have this situation, then people, for people it becomes black and white. You're part of the government, anything we do, we will criticize. From the government perspective, it looks that also it's black and white. You're people, we don't listen to you because you're only criticizing us. And that's the problem. The problem is when dialogue disappears. So the tips that I could give and that we used actually is to search for the common ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's never black and white. There are people, you might hate the whole government, but there are certain people there that are bright spots. These are people who really want to make changes, focus on them. Instead of criticizing everyone, find those people who promote your agenda. Try to find these champions, deal with them, work with them, empower them, compliments, give compliments, speak about them, and help them because they might feel quite lonely. And whenever the government is doing something good, it goes like this. We call our participants, we call our members of our community, and we say, "Did you read that? Speak about it in your social media. Say it was good. Don't only speak about the things that were wrong, but also when it's done good, say that it was done good." And we had these moments when people from the administration were telling us, "Look, we've never heard so many good words about ourselves after we published this decree on the support of creative economy. We thought it's so unmeaningful, but we never heard so many good words. Wow, we'd want to do more about that. What else can we do?" So, let's try to find similarities.
Yeah.
Try to find things that unite us. I don't mean being hypocrite, saying that it's all excellent, everything you do is excellent. No. Just speak about the specific good practices.
Yeah, I always say empathy and allyship, but then sticking firmly to what you believe in. Those three things, absolutely agree.
So I believe in healthy skepticism of anybody in public authority. And as a creative, activist, policy person, I also strongly believe that policies are needed for our sector, especially in the global south. And if I believe that public policies are needed, I mean there's a role for government. And if there's a role for government, then it's our job to help government make the right policies and implement them. And then, it's important then to draw on the programs and the conventions that we have access to, like the UNESCO 2005 convention that says you cannot do policy work, implement policy, or even report on policy without the role of civil society. Yeah. So it gives us the tools to advocate that you actually need dialogue. And you cannot have policies for the culture and creative sector without talking to the culture and creative sector, who know more. They are not run by government. It's not like the health sector or the education sector. Government doesn't set up our institutions, doesn't set up our cultural our spaces where we work. They don't employ us. They don't pay the arts, right? We are a private body. But we need government. So we need to help government create the right policies. So healthy skepticism, but direct involvement. And I want to pick up on the one on fair collaboration, because I think that's critical. We live in a very unbalanced world. It's filled with inequities, power imbalances, deep history of colonialism, deep problems around power imbalance. There's no ways the global north is equal to the global south. And there's no ways the global south can stand up to the global north. Even look at climate issues. A large part of our problems on the African continent around desertification, around lack of water, are coming because of the ways in which industrialization has happened in the global north. Be that as it may, we cannot work without the global north. We have to recognize that collaboration is needed. So let's have some tools to help us think about what is fairness in those international cultural relations environments. And I'm just going to stick to cultural relations here because that's who we are, right? And so I'd like to invite you to look at the unique website, which is the EU National Institute of Culture, of which British Council is a member, as well as Goethe Institute and all those other kinds of institutes, French Institute, etc., where they've developed a toolkit on fairness in international cultural relations with a whole set of tools and support. So for the person who asked that question, I think it's really important because so much of what we do is in collaboration. That's the name of the game when you're talking about relations, cultural relations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally,
Yeah.
Omar.
I was just actually, many of the things I wanted to say, everybody covered. So I think this forum is a great example of exchange between Global North and Global South. I think it's a great success. I think there's more needed to have South-South comparison and exchange. But the reality, as Avril just said, we can't work alone because the resources come from the North, but also a lot of the knowledge is still produced in institutions in the Global North. But that doesn't mean that we need to remain just case studies for theories that are produced in London and Berlin and the United States. However, the most important thing to me is the idea that, the fact that our cities are, the majority of which is produced informally, that doesn't mean we should embrace this as the way to go. Because informal urbanism and urban formality is a very, very conservative mode of urban development because the private actors pursue private interests. So therefore, the role of the state is very, very important because the state is the guardian of public good. And maybe the interim period, unless you live in a democratic society, the state doesn't take a leading role. But eventually, until that happens, we need to find a way to engage in this interim period. We have 2 generations of informality that is here to stay. So we cannot just forget it, but we have to be critical about it. And lastly, there was a question about what can Cairo share with Tashkent about demolition. I think the idea of activism is a tricky part. It depends on the political context of your government. In our case, we opt for more of a tactical sort of activism. We don't go for outright criticism, but we work through demonstration pilot projects. So we case study small pilots that showcase best practice. And I think we also choose in our case, in our projects, to work in the interstices, whether physically, literally, in the passageway, in the gap, or in the interface between public and private, formal and informal. In this kind of middle area between formal training and informal knowledge lies an opportunity to challenge the status quo in a sort of a more implicit way rather than being outright activist. And I think that's my...
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And I just want to say thank you to this amazing panel who I've been so lucky to be working with on the International Council for almost 5 years now. You probably have realized why we wanted to bring this group of people together. It is unique to have all of these viewpoints from around the world, some exactly the same, some opposing. And I hope that you seek out the council members, ask them about the work they're doing, ask them for the specifics. There were some great questions we didn't get to, so I'm sorry if that was the case. The final thing I'd like to end on is there's another panel with other council members looking at the agenda point, and so there were some excellent things coming up on climate, for example, which other council members are going to speak about. But I hope you'll stick around for that discussion and then talk about everything in the round with us this evening. So thank you for your wonderful questions, thank you, and thank you to my brilliant panel.
Thank you, Eliza, for a great moderation. If I could keep you on the stage for a little longer, because I do want to share a few notes about all that's been said here. First of all, wow, great questions, so many of them. I wasn't expecting that, honestly. Excellent. Please keep up the performance and come up with more questions, but also please make sure that you like the questions which you would like to be asked here so that we can see them on top. Just like you said, there are so many of them, and some of them couldn't even be addressed. So, I mean, I'm very happy. I mean, this morning has been great for me because, I heard so many positive remarks from many of you. Eliza, you told us that creative jobs are the jobs of the future, which gave us hope, I guess, all of us. Danyar, you told us about how it is fashionable, it's trendy, it's very favored right now to talk about creative industries in your country. Influence of the creative industries are increasing, and you gave us a great, I guess, piece of news that the most favorable taxes in the world will be in Kyrgyzstan very soon. Funny enough, I think in Turkish the words policy and politics are the same, so you gave me a lot of food for thought there. I'll think about it after. But of course, it's not all a rosy picture here, what we have. Avril, I think you gave us a very realistic and perhaps a little bit of a dire picture about for workers, for informal economy, freelancers, decent working conditions are non-existent. And why do these people go for informal economies? Because, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess a lot of them have to. Because why register yourself as a creator when you cannot afford to live that way? So the market dictates your conditions, and you just stick to what you're doing out of passion, which becomes the bulk of the economy, which becomes, I guess, the working conditions for so many people. So that was a very, very important presentation that you made there. Thanks so much for that. Also, Eliza, you told us about the vulnerability of freelancers and the importance of policies that would target both freelancers and also, I guess, full-time workers, which shouldn't mean that we should wait for, of course, governments to do something. Informality as creativity, we heard from Omar about that. He mentioned the nuance and complexity that informality can bring on a table. And Jairaj, of course, you told us about how it is important to take risks and not wait for governments to do everything, not wait for things to happen, and show the governments what isn't working. So that was an important note as well, I guess. Leandro, I don't know if you know about that, but the teachers stay in Turkey, so some people in the audience was telling me that they were happy to hear your reflections of the role of unis in education, about the gaps they can fill in terms of skills to have a better atmosphere, I guess, a better ecosystem. Now, I don't want to take more of your time. We have a strict 10-minute coffee break because we have to stick to the schedule and we've been running overtime since morning. So I really want your sensitivity on this. Do carry on meeting with new people and finding out about what they do and why they're here. And we're going to be here 10 minutes later. Thanks so much.
Thank you.